Top 7 Jefferson Nickels Worth Big Money. Welcome to Numismatic Vault Extra. Today, we're diving into some of the most valuable top 7 5-cent Jefferson nickels from the United States of America, United States. In this video, we'll explore their current market values, uncover famous era coins, and break down the specific conditions that make certain Jefferson nickels truly rare. That includes silver issues, unique color shades, and special characteristics that have turned these coins into major players in the coin collector and investor world. These rare treasures are not just pieces of history. They're also some of the most valuable coins collectors are actively hunting today. So, if you're a coin enthusiast, an investor, or someone who appreciates the beauty and significance of American currency, backhand index pointing right, this video is for you. Let's get started with the first coin. Magnifying glass tilted left money bag. The story of the 1943 P. Jefferson nickel does not begin in wealth, but in crisis. It was born during a time when the world was shaking, when nations were measured not by comfort but by endurance. Every object created during that era carried urgency, purpose, and sacrifice. In 1943, the United States was deep in World War II, and nothing was ordinary. Not even a 5-cent coin. Metal itself had become a weapon, and the government faced a decision that would permanently alter American coinage. Nickel, once abundant, was suddenly too valuable for everyday money. It was needed for armor, machinery, and survival. Even the smallest coin had to serve the war. That decision gave birth to a strange and historic transformation. The Jefferson nickel was no longer what it appeared to be. It became a silent participant in global conflict. The 1943 P. Jefferson nickel carries silver within its body, not as decoration, but as necessity. This was not luxury silver. It was strategic silver, chosen because the nation demanded it. Philadelphia, marked by the P mint mark above Monticello, struck these coins under pressure. Speed mattered. Precision mattered. There was no room for sentimentality. Millions were produced, yet each one carried the same hidden truth. This was wartime money, created when survival outweighed beauty. At the time, no one celebrated these coins. They were spent quickly, handled roughly, and treated as temporary tools of commerce. People were focused on ration cards, letters from the front, and the uncertainty of tomorrow. Coins were the last thing anyone saved. History often works this way. The most meaningful objects are ignored when they are born. This nickel passed through hands that trembled with worry, hands that had lost sons, hands that worked factories day and night. It crossed counters in diners, train stations, and corner stores, absorbing the invisible weight of a nation at war. The silver inside it never glittered. It was hidden, unnoticed, doing its duty quietly. As years passed and peace returned, the world moved on. New coins appeared. Old ones disappeared into jars, drawers, and forgotten places. Most wartime nickels vanished through circulation, corrosion, and melting. Survival became accidental. Time began its quiet work. Not dramatic, not announced, just slow elimination. What remains today is not just metal. It is preserved tension from a year when history bent hard. The idea that this coin could change a fortune overnight is not magic. It is patience misunderstood. True value does not shout. It waits. Condition becomes destiny. A coin untouched by careless years tells a different story than one worn thin by chance. Collectors do not chase these coins for their face value. They chase them because they are witnesses. This nickel remembers a time when America chose endurance over comfort and necessity over tradition. The P mint mark is not decoration. It is a signature of origin, proof that this coin came from the heart of American coinage during its most demanding hour. Silver within a 5-cent coin was never meant to be permanent. That is what makes it historic. Today, the 1943 P. Jefferson nickel stands at the intersection of history and modern curiosity, trending not because it promises fantasy wealth, but because it represents real transformation. Those who rush to sell miss the lesson. Those who understand time recognize that value matures, not explodes. This coin does not make billionaires by itself. It makes historians out of observers and rewards those who respect context. Every surviving example is a fragment of a global story, small enough to fit in a palm, heavy enough to carry meaning. The greatest power of the 1943 P. Jefferson nickel is not silver, it is survival. It lived through war, neglect, and transition, and still exists. And sometimes, the true fortune is not what a coin can buy, but what it teaches those patient enough to hold it and listen. Next up. The 1944 P. Jefferson 5-cent nickel was not born in a time of peace, comfort, or excess. It came into the world when history itself was under pressure. Every object created in that year carried urgency, and this small coin was no exception. It was struck while the world was burning, when nations measured their strength not in wealth but in endurance. By 1944, the United States was fully consumed by World War II, and even something as ordinary as a nickel became part of the war effort. Metal was no longer just metal. It was tanks, ships, weapons, and survival. The country could not afford waste, and coinage had to change. This is why the 1944 Jefferson nickel is different from most coins people casually spend and forget. Inside it lives silver, not as luxury, not as decoration, but as a substitute forced by history. The nation had taken nickel out of circulation and replaced it with a wartime alloy that quietly altered American money forever. The Philadelphia Mint, marked by the bold P above Monticello, worked relentlessly. These coins were struck quickly, efficiently, and without ceremony. There was no intention to create a future treasure. This was emergency money, designed to function in a world that had no patience for sentiment. Millions of these coins were released into circulation, flooding stores, train stations, military bases, and factories. They passed through hands stained with grease, ink, and sweat. They jingled in pockets beside ration cards and folded letters from soldiers overseas. At the time, no one stopped to admire them. No one imagined they would one day be spoken of with reverence. They were spent without hesitation, dropped into registers, lost under floorboards, or worn smooth by daily life. But history has a habit of choosing its survivors. While many 1944 P nickels vanished through melting, corrosion, or neglect, some endured. They sat untouched in jars, drawers, and forgotten corners, quietly aging while the world moved on. What makes this coin powerful today is not fantasy, but survival. It is a witness to a moment when America reshaped its money to meet the demands of war. It carries the memory of sacrifice in its weight and composition. The silver inside this coin does not shout. It whispers. It tells a story of urgency, adaptation, and national resolve. That quiet story is what draws modern attention and fuels growing fascination. In today's coin market, the 1944 P. Jefferson nickel trends not because it promises instant riches, but because it connects the present to a moment when even 5 cents mattered deeply. Collectors are drawn to meaning as much as metal. Condition transforms destiny. A well-preserved example speaks differently than a worn one. The sharper the details, the louder the history speaks. Time becomes the judge, separating the ordinary from the remarkable. The idea that such a coin could change a fortune overnight comes not from magic, but from patience misunderstood. True value is slow. It matures quietly, shaped by scarcity, survival, and story. Those who rush to sell often see only the surface. Those who hold and learn begin to understand that this coin is not just currency, it is evidence. Evidence that history leaves traces in the smallest places. The P mint mark is not just a letter. It is a signature from a year when America's heart worked non-stop, striking money that could keep moving while the world stood still. The 1944 P. Jefferson nickel does not promise billions, but it offers something more durable: connection. To a time, to a struggle, to a moment when even a 5-cent coin carried the weight of a nation's survival. And sometimes, that connection, preserved in silver and time, is where real value begins. Next up. The story of the 1961 D. Jefferson 5-cent nickel begins not in war, but in confidence. America had entered a new era, one defined by growth, optimism, and quiet strength. Coins minted in this time did not scream urgency, they whispered stability. In 1961, the nation was moving forward, yet still carrying the weight of the past. The memory of silver coins had not faded. People still remembered when money felt heavier, richer, more permanent. The Denver Mint struck the 1961 Jefferson nickel with precision and routine, marking it with a small d that quietly identified its birthplace. It was never meant to be rare. It was meant to work. Millions were released into circulation, blending seamlessly into daily life. These coins bought coffee, bus rides, newspapers, and moments that were never recorded in history books. At first glance, there was nothing extraordinary. No silver shimmer. No wartime alloy. Just a simple nickel doing its job. But history does not only value what was intended to be special. It values what survives interpretation. As years passed, rumors began to grow. Stories spread about unusual weights, strange tones, and coins that sounded different when dropped. The idea of hidden silver took root in imagination. Whether born from error, confusion, or hope, the myth gave the 1961 D nickel a second life. Not as currency, but as curiosity. Collectors began to look closer. Not for guaranteed riches, but for anomalies, mint errors, pristine condition, and unanswered questions. In coin collecting, condition can elevate the ordinary into the remarkable. A flawless surface becomes a time capsule. A sharp strike becomes a frozen moment. Some 1961 D nickel survived untouched, escaping wear and neglect. These coins now carry a different energy. Quiet, focused, patient. The belief that a coin can change a fortune overnight is powerful, but the truth is more subtle. Value grows when attention grows, and attention follows story. The 1961 D. Jefferson nickel trends today not because it promises instant wealth, but because it sits at the edge between myth and material. It represents the moment before silver disappeared from American pocket change, the calm before transformation. Those who rush to sell see only metal. Those who wait understand momentum. Coins like this teach a lesson. Sometimes value comes not from what is inside the coin, but from what people believe, question, and search for. The real power of the 1961 Jefferson nickel is not silver. It is speculation shaped by time. And in the modern coin market, time is where fortunes begin, not overnight miracles. Next up. The 1962 Jefferson 5-cent nickel was born in a moment of calm confidence, a year when America felt steady on the surface but restless underneath. It was a time when money still felt solid in the hand, even if its meaning was beginning to change. This coin came from Philadelphia, carrying no mint mark at all, as if anonymity itself were part of its identity. Millions were struck, not to be admired, but to move, through shops, pockets, and everyday life. By 1962, silver was already disappearing from most American coins, and people could feel it. They talked about it. They compared weight, sound, and shine. The idea that money was becoming lighter haunted conversations. The Jefferson nickel stood at the edge of that transition. It looked familiar, felt familiar, and yet existed in a world where trust in metal was slowly fading. There was no intention to make this coin special. It was designed to be ordinary, dependable, and forgettable. History often hides its secrets in such objects. As decades passed, stories began to form. Some swore certain nickels felt heavier. Others believed mistakes slipped through the mint. The idea of hidden silver took root not in fact, but in hope. Hope is powerful. In the coin world, hope creates legends. Legends create attention. And attention creates value where none was expected. Collectors began to examine 1962 nickels more closely, not because they were rare, but because they represented the last breath of an era when coins still felt honest. Condition began to matter. A sharply struck, untouched example became a silent messenger from the early 1960s, a preserved moment before monetary change reshaped everything. In today's market, this coin trends not as a silver treasure, but as a symbol of transition. It reminds people of what was lost, not what was hidden. The belief that it could change a fortune overnight does not come from metal content. It comes from the psychology of collecting, where story and timing can be as powerful as gold. Coins gain momentum when people start asking questions. Why does this one feel different? Why does it survive so cleanly? Why do we keep talking about it? The 1962 no-mint mark Jefferson nickel exists at that intersection, between reality and rumor, between common and compelling. Those who rush to spend it see only 5 cents. Those who pause see a mirror of American change, frozen in copper and nickel. No, it will not magically make a billionaire. But it teaches something more valuable. That meaning grows when people look closer. And sometimes, in the modern coin world, the real fortune is not in silver at all, but in attention, patience, and the stories we choose to believe. Next up. The 1958 D. Jefferson 5-cent nickel was born at the quiet edge of an era. America was not at war, not in crisis, yet something important was slipping away without announcement. Coins were about to change forever, and most people didn't notice. Struck at the Denver Mint, marked with a small D, this coin entered circulation during a year that now feels like a final breath of old-style American money. It looked ordinary, but timing gave it significance. By the late 1950s, silver had already vanished from dimes and quarters, and people were uneasy. Money was still trusted, but that trust was thinner than before. The Jefferson nickel stood as one of the last familiar anchors. Millions of 1958 D nickels were produced, meant to flow endlessly through hands, pockets, and registers. They bought soda, newspapers, bus rides, and moments that would never be recorded. No one saved them. No one imagined a future audience. They were treated as invisible tools of daily life. That neglect is where history begins to work its magic. What survives neglect gains meaning. Over time, most of these nickels wore down, disappeared, or were lost. High-quality examples became surprisingly scarce, not by design, but by accident. Collectors today don't chase the 1958 D nickel because of silver content. They chase it because finding one untouched is like finding a preserved heartbeat from 1950s America. Rumors still circulate about unusual weight, strange tone, hidden value. These stories aren't facts, but they fuel curiosity, and curiosity fuels markets. In the modern coin world, belief and attention can elevate even common coins into trending topics. The 1958 nickel sits perfectly in that space. Its power comes from contrast. It looks simple, yet represents the last years before American coinage lost its old character. Condition changes everything. A sharp strike with clean surfaces tells a story louder than rarity alone ever could. The idea that this coin could change a fortune overnight is not about metal. It's about timing, hype cycles, and patience. Those who rush to sell see only 5 cents. Those who hold see a growing audience, a growing conversation, and a growing sense of nostalgia. The 1958 Jefferson nickel trends today because it represents the end of something, not the beginning. People are drawn to endings. It reminds us that value doesn't always hide in silver. Sometimes it hides in history, survival, and the human desire to rediscover what once felt permanent. Next up, the 1974 Jefferson 5-cent nickel was born in a decade that felt restless, loud, and uncertain. America was no longer living in the shadow of war, but it was struggling with identity, trust, and value. Money itself felt different, lighter in the hand and heavier in the mind. This coin came from Philadelphia, carrying no mint mark, almost as if it wanted to blend into the background. Millions were struck, released without ceremony into a world distracted by inflation, energy crises, and social change. By 1974, silver was already a memory in everyday American change. People talked about it the way they talk about lost quality, lost weight, lost meaning. Coins no longer rang the same when dropped. The Jefferson nickel became a symbol of continuity. It still looked familiar, still carried a face people trusted, even as the world around it shifted rapidly. At the time, no one saved these nickels. They were spent fast, exchanged faster, and forgotten almost immediately. That forgetfulness would later become their greatest legacy. They passed through gas stations during oil shortages, grocery stores during rising prices, and pockets filled with uncertainty. This coin absorbed the anxiety of its era without anyone noticing. History has a strange habit of hiding meaning inside common objects. The more ordinary something seems, the more invisible it becomes. And invisibility is where survival often begins. Over time, most 1974 nickels wore down. Edges softened. Details faded. They disappeared into loss, corrosion, and neglect. What remains today is only a fraction of what once existed. As decades passed, curiosity returned. People began re-examining coins from the 1970s, questioning whether something had been overlooked during chaotic years. Stories emerged. Some spoke of unusual weight. Others mentioned strange coloration or sound. The idea of hidden silver crept into conversations, not as fact, but as possibility. Possibility is powerful. In the coin world, possibility fuels attention, and attention fuels value. Not overnight miracles, but momentum. Collectors began searching not for fantasy, but for anomalies. Mint errors, pristine condition, unusual strikes, anything that broke routine. A perfectly preserved 1974 no-mint mark nickel became more than 5 cents. It became a preserved moment from a decade people still try to understand. Condition turned ordinary metal into a time capsule. Sharp steps on Monticello. Clean fields. A face untouched by decades of friction. The belief that this coin could change a fortune overnight is rooted in emotion, not chemistry. It reflects a desire to reclaim lost value in a world that feels increasingly abstract. In today's market, the 1974 Jefferson nickel trends because it sits at the crossroads of memory and speculation. It represents a time when money began to feel symbolic rather than substantial. People are drawn to it because it reminds them of a moment when trust in systems began to crack, and tangible objects felt safer than promises. The lack of a mint mark does not mean rarity, but it does mean origin. It ties the coin directly to the heart of American production during a turbulent decade. Coins like this gain attention not because they are rare by numbers, but because they are rare by condition and context. The modern collector is not just buying metal. They are buying narrative, nostalgia, and the feeling of rediscovery. Those who rush to spend or dismiss this coin see only face value. Those who pause see timing, cycles, and the way markets respond to story. No, this nickel does not secretly contain millions in silver. But value is not always inside the metal. Sometimes it exists in demand, timing, and belief. The 1974 Jefferson nickel reminds us that history does not announce itself. It hides in plain sight, waiting for someone to look again. Its real power lies in survival, curiosity, and the modern hunger to find meaning in overlooked things. This coin will not magically create billionaires, but it can reward patience, knowledge, and attention. And in a world obsessed with speed, patience itself has become rare and valuable. Sometimes the true fortune is not what you find overnight, but what you recognize before everyone else does. Next up, the 1959 Jefferson 5-cent nickel arrived quietly, without ceremony, during a year when America believed it had found its rhythm. The future looked modern, confident, and unstoppable, yet something subtle was already changing beneath the surface of everyday life. This coin was born in Philadelphia, carrying no mint mark, almost anonymous by design. It was not meant to stand out. It was meant to circulate endlessly, unnoticed and unquestioned. By 1959, silver had already vanished from dimes and quarters, and people felt the difference even if they didn't fully understand it. Coins felt lighter, sounded duller, and somehow seemed less permanent. The Jefferson nickel remained familiar, like an anchor to an older idea of money. It looked solid. It felt dependable. It carried a face associated with stability and reason. Millions of these nickels poured into circulation. They bought milk, newspapers, movie tickets, and moments that were never meant to be remembered. They passed through hands that trusted money without fear. No one saved them. No one imagined they would one day be questioned, searched for, or discussed. Their ordinary nature made them invisible. But invisibility is where history hides its most interesting survivors. As years turned into decades, most 1959 nickels wore down. The steps of Monticello softened. Jefferson's profile blurred. Countless examples vanished through loss, corrosion, and neglect. What survived did so by accident. Forgotten jars, desk drawers, childhood collections abandoned and rediscovered years later. With time came curiosity. Collectors began looking backward, searching for the moment when American money quietly changed character. Rumors surfaced, as they always do. Stories of odd weight, unusual color, strange sound when dropped. Whispers of hidden silver spread, not as proof, but as possibility. Possibility is powerful. In the coin world, it doesn't need to be true to create momentum. It only needs to be questioned. The 1959 no-mint mark Jefferson nickel sits perfectly at that intersection between fact and fascination. It represents the last calm moment before American coinage became purely industrial. Condition became destiny. A sharply struck, well-preserved example suddenly felt rare, not because few were made, but because few survived untouched. Collectors began to understand that value is not always born at the mint. Sometimes it is created by time itself. In today's market, this coin trends because it reflects nostalgia mixed with uncertainty. People long for objects that feel honest and complete. The idea that such a coin could change a fortune overnight does not come from metal content. It comes from belief in rediscovery. People want to believe something valuable slipped through unnoticed. That history made a mistake. That ordinary people still have a chance to find meaning in their pockets. The lack of a mint mark does not mean rarity, but it does mean origin. It ties the coin directly to the heart of American production at a turning point. Coins like this become symbols, not of wealth but of transition, of what was lost quietly, not dramatically. The 1959 Jefferson nickel reminds collectors that the most important changes often happen without headlines. It teaches patience. It rewards attention. It punishes haste. Those who rush to sell see only 5 cents. Those who pause see a story still unfolding. No, this coin will not magically make a billionaire. But it can change perspective, and sometimes perspective is what leads to opportunity. The real power of this nickel is not silver hidden inside, it is time embedded outside. It survived an era of neglect and now lives in an era of curiosity. And in the modern coin world, curiosity is the first step toward value. Sometimes fortune does not arrive overnight. Sometimes it waits quietly for decades, hoping someone will finally look twice. Next up, the 1956 D. Jefferson 5-cent nickel was born in a decade that believed in permanence. America was confident, factories were humming, and people trusted that tomorrow would look like today, only better. Money felt solid, reliable, and unquestioned. Struck at the Denver Mint and marked with a small but important D, this coin entered circulation quietly. It was never announced as special. It was created to work, to move, to disappear into everyday life. In 1956, silver still lived vividly in public memory. People remembered the sound, the weight, the authority of coins that felt valuable the moment they touched the hand. That memory gave every coin meaning, even those without silver inside. The Jefferson nickel carried that inherited trust. Its design felt thoughtful, its presence calm. It did not shine loudly, but it belonged. Millions of these nickels were released, flooding shops, schools, buses, and movie theaters. They passed through hands that believed money was stable and the future predictable. No one saved them. No one imagined a collector market. They were spent freely, stacked carelessly, and forgotten easily. That forgetfulness became their destiny. Time moved forward, and America changed faster than anyone expected. New metals, new policies, new attitudes toward value reshaped the meaning of money. The 1956 D nickel endured that transformation silently. It wore down, faded, and blended into the background of history. Most examples vanished, lost in couch cushions, corroded in the ground, or worn smooth through decades of handling. What survived did so by accident, not intention. Survival without intention is what gives ordinary objects their power. As collectors began looking backward, the 1950s became a focal point. It was the last decade when money still felt emotionally anchored. Rumors began to circulate. Stories of unusual weight, strange color, or coins that sounded different when dropped. The idea of hidden silver crept into imagination. These stories were not facts, but they were powerful. In collecting, belief often moves markets before proof ever arrives. The 1956 D. Jefferson nickel became part of that conversation, not because it was rare by numbers, but because it was rare by condition. A sharply struck example with clean fields and defined steps on Monticello suddenly felt extraordinary. Time had filtered the ordinary into the exceptional. Condition became the dividing line between common change and historical artifact. In today's coin market, this nickel trends because it represents the calm before monetary change. People are drawn to moments just before transformation. The idea that it could change a fortune overnight comes from emotion, not chemistry. It reflects a desire to believe something valuable was overlooked. Coins become powerful when they sit between certainty and mystery. The 1956 D nickel lives there. The D mint mark ties it to Denver's steady production during an era of confidence. It marks origin, not rarity, but origin matters. Collectors today are not just buying metal. They are buying preserved time, frozen optimism, and the feeling of rediscovery. Those who rush to spend or sell see only 5 cents. Those who pause see momentum forming slowly. No, this coin does not secretly contain millions in silver. But value is not always hidden inside metal. Sometimes value forms around narrative, nostalgia, and attention, all of which grow over time. The 1956 D. Jefferson nickel teaches a quiet lesson. What seems ordinary today may become meaningful tomorrow. It survived because no one thought it mattered. Now it matters because it survived. And in a world obsessed with speed, the greatest advantage belongs to those who recognize value before it becomes obvious. Fortune rarely changes overnight. It changes when patience meets awareness. Sometimes the most powerful coin is not the rarest one, but the one history almost erased. Next up, the 1988 D. Jefferson 5-cent nickel was born in a world that believed everything important had already been discovered. America felt modern, fast, and certain that the past no longer mattered. Coins were treated as tools, not treasures. Struck at the Denver Mint and marked with a quiet D, this nickel entered circulation without ceremony. It was never meant to be admired. It was meant to move, to disappear, to be forgotten. By 1988, silver coins were already a distant memory to most people. Money had become lighter, cheaper in feel, and emotionally disconnected. Few stopped to question what had been lost. The Jefferson nickel carried on unchanged in design, even as the meaning of money shifted around it. That continuity made it invisible. Millions of 1988 D nickels poured into daily life. They passed through vending machines, school cafeterias, grocery stores, and gas stations. They were handled without thought, without respect, without pause. No one saved them. No one imagined they would ever be searched for. Their ordinary nature was their camouflage. History often hides its future questions inside objects no one bothers to look at. As years passed, the 1980s faded into nostalgia. People began looking backward, reassessing what they had dismissed as modern and unimportant. Collectors noticed something strange about 1988 D nickels. Not rarity by numbers, but rarity by quality. Many were poorly struck, heavily worn, or damaged early in life. Finding a sharply struck, well-preserved example became harder than expected. Time had filtered them aggressively. This is where attention begins to grow. Scarcity does not always come from low mintage. Sometimes it comes from neglect. Rumors began circulating, as they always do. Stories of odd weight, strange sound, unusual composition. Whispers of hidden silver crept into imagination. These stories were not facts, but they were powerful. In the coin world, belief can create momentum long before proof exists. The 1988 D. Jefferson nickel became part of that momentum, not because it promised miracles, but because it raised questions. Collectors began hunting for errors, unusual strikes, double details, and exceptional condition. The ordinary coin became a puzzle. Condition became destiny. A clean surface, sharp steps on Monticello, and strong details transformed 5 cents into conversation. In today's market, this nickel trends because it challenges assumptions. People don't expect value from something so recent. The idea that it could change a fortune overnight reflects a deeper desire. The hope that value still hides in plain sight. Coins from the late 20th century sit at a psychological crossroads. They feel too modern to be historic, yet too old to be new. That tension attracts attention. The D mint mark connects this coin to Denver's high-volume production during an era of speed and efficiency. Quantity mattered more than perfection. That makes perfection rare today. Collectors are not chasing silver here. They are chasing survival, quality, and story. The 1988 D nickel represents a time when money lost its romance, and now people are trying to bring meaning back. Those who rush to dismiss it see only face value. Those who pause see a slow-building narrative. No, this coin will not magically make a billionaire. But markets are not built on magic. They are built on attention. Attention grows when people start asking questions together. The real power of this nickel is not hidden metal. It is delayed recognition. It survived an era that didn't care. Now it lives in an era that looks back. And sometimes, value is created not when something is rare, but when people finally decide to look. Fortunes do not always change overnight. Sometimes they change the moment perception shifts. And perception, once it moves, is impossible to stop.